Hi, this is Mrs. Kidman, and I am so excited to be talking to you about polynomials. Now, this is the first video in Chapter 2 as we move on to this new chapter, and this whole chapter is going to be about polynomials. In this video, we're going to talk about what a polynomial is, we're going to kind of talk about the setup of them, and we're also going to talk about ways that we can classify polynomials. So a polynomial is either a monomial or a sum of monomials. So monomial breaks down, mono means one, and nomial means number. So when we talk about a monomial, it's a one number that's in an expression. So those monomials kind of have a couple parts. This right here is a great example of a monomial. At most, a monomial will have these three parts. It has a coefficient, it may have a variable, and then lastly, it has this exponent. Now, every monomial is a little bit different, but in general, you're going to find that a monomial has these parts. There are types of monomials that might be just an x, so it doesn't have a leading coefficient, or that leading coefficient is 1, but we don't write it. We also have numbers that are called constant terms, which are also considered monomials, which would be like 13. Now it's that term, it's that part, but notice this is just the coefficient portion. It doesn't have our variable or exponent listed. Now, that's kind of what a monomial is. A polynomial is either just a monomial by itself, or it's the sum of those. So if we take a bunch of different monomials and we add them together, we have a polynomial. Now, when we write them all together, we end up calling each little monomial a term. And so when we talk about things like combining like terms in later videos, we're talking about combining those monomials that are like one another. So one way that we're going to classify these polynomials is we are going to classify them based on how many parts they have. So if a polynomial has two terms in it, we call it a binomial. Now, monomial, one number, bi means two, like in the word bicycle, so a binomial has two terms in it. Those two terms can vary whether they have exponents, whether they're constants, but a binomial has two terms in it. A trinomial is the other one that we're going to be classifying, and those have three parts because tri means three. So we're going to be looking at monomials, which are one part, binomials, which have two parts, trinomials, which have three parts, and then other polynomials, which might have 4 terms, 5 terms, 6 terms, 7 terms, things like that. So that's the first way we're going to classify them. The other way we're going to look at classifying these polynomials is by the degree of a polynomial. Now, the degree of a polynomial refers to the greatest degree between all of its terms. So, for example, if I had something like 3x squared plus 4x plus 7x cubed, the greatest degree in this case is going to be that x cubed. So our degree of this polynomial is going to be 3. Because it's the greatest one. Even though it's not in the front, we're looking at what is the greatest value there. So that is how we're going to identify them by degrees. When we find that degree, the number in front of it, so this 7 in this case, is called our leading coefficient. The leading coefficient is always attached to the monomial that has the highest degree. Now, notice how it's not in the front of this polynomial here. That's because this polynomial is not written in standard form. Standard form is when our exponents decrease from left to right. So for example, down here, we have this example of a polynomial. This one has 4 parts, and it's written in standard form. So notice how it goes 3, the power of 2, power of 1, and then a constant term. Now notice that constant term has no x values or no variables attached to it. Now our degree of this polynomial is going to come right here. It comes from that 3, and then our leading coefficient is the number in front of it. So we are going to take a look at some examples where we write things in standard form, we identify how many parts they have, so whether they're a monomial or a trinomial or a binomial, and we're also going to identify their leading coefficient and their degree. So let's take a look. This first example here, we are going to write 15x minus x to the third plus 3 in standard form. And then we will identify the degree and the leading coefficient. So when I do this, I'm going to circle each of the terms, and the term includes the sign in front of it. So that sign is going to travel with our number wherever it goes. Now this 15 doesn't have a sign in front of it, but really this is a positive 15. So when we rewrite this in standard form, I want to write it from the biggest degree to the smallest one. So the degree on this one is 1, this x cubed has a degree of 3, and this 3 has a degree of 0. So what this means is I want this negative x cubed as my first number. So I'm going to write negative x cubed. And then I will go in descending order. So I'll go next to my 15x. So plus 15x plus 3. Notice how that sign traveled directly with those. Now that we've rewritten it in standard form, so notice how it goes down. Our degree of our polynomial is going to be the highest exponent. And our highest exponent here was 3. And then when we talk about the leading coefficient, that leading coefficient is going to be the number in front of what's at the degree 3. So here we have the degree 3. I just have a negative sign. Remember in math people are kind of lazy. And so when we just see a negative and there's no number in between, the number that is actually there is the number 1. So our leading coefficient in this case is going to be a negative 1. And that's kind of how we would answer that question. Notice how this polynomial has 3 parts. We could also call this polynomial a trinomial because it has 3 terms, term 1, term 2, term 3, just like we circled those 3 terms up above. So that is how we would rewrite something in standard form, identify the degree and the leading coefficient, and we can also classify it as a trinomial because it has those 3 terms. Take a look at our next video to figure out how we could add polynomials, or the one after that where we discuss how we can subtract polynomials.